Have you ever found yourself in a relationship where, day by day, it felt like a piece of you was slipping away? Not because someone meant you harm, but because you kept choosing silence. You gave in, you let things slide, you told yourself it was better not to stir the waters. Until one day, you looked in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. They call you a good man, patient, reliable, the kind who sacrifices, who never complains, who always puts family first. But behind that steady image is someone, quietly vanishing. A man who once knew what he wanted, who once had a voice, now overshadowed by the weight of doing what's expected. It started small. You thought you were just avoiding conflict. You wanted harmony, but over time, that became your default. You carried everything on your back, not because you were asked to, but because you believed it was your duty. And in doing so, you slowly stopped asking what you needed. Marcus Aurelius once reminded us not to let our soul become a copy of someone else's, to guard it. But maybe we started losing that soul the first time we mistook quiet for love, the moments we chose not to speak up to protect someone else's feelings. The days we stopped checking in with ourselves and asking the most basic question, am I still whole? One morning, you wake up in the same bed, in the same home, surrounded by the same people, and yet you feel foreign to yourself, like you're acting out a role rather than living a life. If you've ever felt this erosion, this quiet vanishing of self within a relationship once full of love, don't turn away. This message is not about blame. It's about beginning again. With one honest step. I lost myself once, but I am finding my way back. And so can you. Not every man crumbles when life throws him off course. Some do not scream, do not break things, do not even shed a tear. Instead, they quietly shrink, slowly, silently, and the most unsettling part is they barely notice it's happening. You may have once been a man who stood with confidence, clear in your purpose, solid in your values. You knew who you were. You weren't flawless, but you had direction. You had conviction. You believed that entering marriage meant bringing that strength with you, becoming the stable, loving partner who could handle anything with grace. But marriage does not always reflect the picture you had in mind. It offers no clear path, no guidelines, and often no separate place for you, only a shared existence. So you adapt. You start to yield, to make room, to smooth over the rough edges. At first, it feels like maturity, like love. You avoid arguments, once, then twice, until avoidance becomes your default response. You convince yourself you're being noble, that your silence is strength, that your sacrifice is proof of love, that this is what a real man does. Hold it all together without ever asking for anything in return. Asterisk, what you don't see is that every time you swallow your truth, you drift further from your center, until one day you don't know what lights you up anymore. Your routines are borrowed, your time is spoken for, and there's no space that feels entirely your own. Life moves forward, but you feel like a spectator. You still do your job, you show up for your family, but something vital has gone missing. You no longer write the way you once did. The books you meant to read gather dust. Your friendships fade. Without a fight, you speak less, not out of contentment, but because your inner voice has grown faint. This is not the kind of loss that happens in a single moment. It is the slow erosion that comes from repeatedly giving parts of yourself away, not because someone took them, but because you stopped protecting them. You were never forced to let go of the things that mattered to you. You simply set them down, quietly, believing it was the price of harmony, the cost of keeping the peace, of holding together an image of the perfect family, and over time, you began to believe that was normal, that losing parts of yourself was just part of being a good man. We admire the man who sacrifices. We call him devoted, selfless, dependable. But rarely do we ask what remains of him when all the giving has emptied him out. The truth is, emotions do not disappear when ignored. They don't dissolve, they harden. Then one night, without warning, they surface. In irritability you can't explain. In a quiet frustration that sits with you long after everyone else has gone to bed. In the stillness, you wonder what happened to your life. Stoicism is not about enduring without feeling. It is not about biting your tongue until it bleeds. It is about meeting life with clarity, with strength rooted in reason. But clarity does not come from denying what you feel. Epictetus once said, "You cannot control what happens, but you can control how you respond." That response should be honest, not numbing. Strength is not saying "I'm fine" while breaking inside. Long silences do not bring peace. They create distance, distance from your own inner world, and eventually you become a man others admire while feeling like a stranger to yourself. Ask yourself, when was the last time you did something purely because it brought you joy? The last time you declined an obligation without apologizing? The last time you sat in your own presence and actually felt whole? Marcus Aurelius reminded us not to live as though we have unlimited time. Every day you remain silent, someone else shapes your life without your consent. One morning, you may look around and see the titles are still there. You are still a husband, still a father, but somewhere along the way, you stopped being fully you. You are fulfilling your role, but the cost has been your own soul. You were once strong, but strength was never meant to be measured by how much you can carry alone. It begins with one simple, difficult act. Telling yourself the truth. Saying, "I'm not okay," without flinching. That kind of honesty takes strength. Not the kind the world praises, but the kind that leads to real healing. It doesn't require a grand gesture, just a question. What do I need right now? What do I actually want? Give yourself the space to answer that. Let yourself feel. Let yourself speak. Let yourself decline, not out of selfishness, but to guard what still belongs to you. This is how you hold on to what's real. This is how you stop yourself from fading into the background of your own life. Strength is not in enduring without expression. It is in the decision to return to yourself, no matter how long you've been gone. Over time, the things you did out of love become invisible. No one notices when you refill the gas tank, when you fix the door, when you sense the mood in the room and soften your own. There are no thank yous anymore. But that was never the point. You showed up because that's who you are, because you care. Because you thought being a man meant making sure everyone else was okay, even if you weren't. You rose before the sun. You worked past exhaustion. You tuned in to what no one said aloud. You paid attention to what mattered to others and made it your job to remember. You didn't ask for praise. You just wanted to be seen, not celebrated, just acknowledged, just understood. But love without balance slowly turns into duty, and duty without rest becomes depletion. The same care that once came from your heart now feels like a weight you carry out of habit. You haven't stopped loving, you've just forgotten how to love yourself in the process. And when you missed a step, no one paused to ask what was wrong. They just said, "How could you forget?" You stopped being seen as a human being and started being treated like a piece of the machinery, expected to run without pause, without error. You didn't protest. You told yourself to try harder, to do more. You thought maybe, just maybe, your extra effort would finally be enough for someone to notice. But instead of appreciation, your efforts became routine. Instead of gratitude, there was assumption. The more consistent you were, the more invisible you became. The more silent you stayed, the more others believed you were fine. The love you once offered with open hands slowly turned into something others assumed would always be there. Not received with warmth, but taken as owed. And that's when the exhaustion truly began. Not in your body, but in your spirit. Not from the work itself, but from how distant it now feels from meaning. You're not tired because you've done too much. You're tired because it no longer feels like your life. You move through the motions with care. You meet each responsibility, but you're no longer inside the experience. You're operating, not living. There's a kind of weariness that doesn't come from doing, but from forgetting why you started. The kindness that once defined you now feels like obligation. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started disappearing inside it. And no one asks, are you okay? Not even you. That question has gone quiet, buried under years of meeting expectations, smoothing edges, keeping things from falling apart. You used to think that love meant giving without limits, that needing nothing in return was noble. But love without visibility loses its warmth. Not because you're selfish, but because to be human is to be seen, to be known, to be valued not just for what you provide, but for who you are. Seneca once wrote that the wise man does not live to please others, but to remain true to himself. At some point, though, your life began revolving around the needs of everyone but you. You gave everything, hoping it would be enough. And in doing so, you forgot to give yourself the one thing no one else can offer: recognition. The man who never asks for anything slowly fades from view. The one who never voices discomfort is quietly marked as fine. The man who always says, "It's okay," almost never hears the question, "But how are you, really?" And over time, that silence starts to echo inside. You begin to wonder if maybe you're asking for too much, even when you're not asking for anything at all. Deep down, you're just hoping someone might see you. Not for what you do, but for who you are. In marriage, strength is expected of men, but few are ever taught how to keep their softness intact without being misunderstood. You've always been good at carrying the weight. You took pride in that. You enjoyed being the one others could rely on. It gave you purpose. It made you feel valued. But when the help you give becomes routine, when no one stops to recognize the care behind the effort, it all begins to feel hollow. The pride you once felt in being dependable fades. The identity you built around being the strong one starts to feel more like a role than a reflection of your true self. You keep showing up. You smile when it's expected. You say the right things. But inside, there's a quiet sadness that never fully clears. It lingers like a low, steady rain. You don't speak of it because you've convinced yourself that it wouldn't matter, that no one really wants to hear the truth behind your silence. So you retreat, not in anger, but from depletion. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you have nothing left to give. And the more you disconnect, the less meaning your actions seem to carry. Slowly, you stop initiating. You stop reaching for connection. Not to punish anyone, but because you're tired of showing up without being seen, and one day, without meaning to, you whisper to yourself, "It doesn't matter." anymore. That quiet shift is where love begins to thin. Not because someone wronged you, but because you can no longer find yourself in the version of life you've been maintaining. You've stayed quiet because you believed it was your role, because you thought responsibility meant silence. But there is a subtle difference between love and obligation. When love is not acknowledged, it starts to feel like pressure, and pressure, over time, wears down the spirit. It becomes a quiet weight you carry in your chest, one that no one sees, but you feel every day. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that fatigue often comes not from effort, but from inner conflict. You're tired not because of all you do, but because of how little space there is for who you truly are. You've become everything to everyone else, yet no one really knows what you need. And if you're honest, you don't either. That's the part that unsettles you. You're not angry, you're not bitter, but you've also stopped reaching forward with hope. You move through the day on instinct, not intention. Your love has become an act of muscle memory, no longer connected to your heart in the way it once was. Unseen love slowly begins to wither, like something once vibrant that now exists only out of routine. Not because it was fake, but because no one stopped to nurture it, not even you. You've tried to hold it all together. You've carried more than your share. But maybe now the question isn't what more you can give. Maybe the question is, am I still living in alignment with who I am? And if the answer is no, then this is not your breaking point. It's your turning point. A moment to pause. Not to walk away, not to quit, but to return. To reclaim the parts of you that were never meant to be lost. To come home to yourself. Come home to something simple, something human. The need to be seen not just as dependable, but as someone who also feels deeply. Someone who carries much, yes, but who also deserves to be held. Someone who deserves to be asked, how are you, really? Without judgment, without pressure. To be strong, real love isn't about doing everything. It's about staying generous without letting your own light fade. When you feel the first signs of burnout, do not double down on effort. Do not convince yourself that pushing through is the answer. Pause, breathe, say what's true. Not to change others, but to remember that you still exist, that your experience still matters. You were not born to be a role. You were born to be a full person. Your feelings are not extra. They are part of what make you whole. There is a cost many men carry, and it's not just hard work. It's silence. Not the kind that brings calm, but the kind that cuts you off from your own truth. You stopped speaking up to keep the peace. You told yourself one more quiet night was worth more than one more argument. You thought letting things go made you wise, strong, mature, and maybe it did. For a while you could handle it. You swallowed your discomfort. You stayed calm when things felt off. You told yourself it wasn't worth the fight, that you could carry the tension without letting it show, and you did. Until that silence became part of your identity, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped expecting to be heard. You started removing your voice from the conversation, one moment at a time. With each silent decision, you gave away small pieces of your presence. You weren't choosing peace. You were slowly disconnecting from the people around you, from the things that mattered, and eventually from yourself. You adapted so well to silence that you forgot what it meant to be honest. Not just with them, with you. You said just enough to keep the peace. You smiled when you didn't mean it. You nodded along even when something felt off. And every time it happened, you told yourself, it's fine. let it go. But it wasn't fine. What started as an effort to avoid conflict slowly turned into a habit of self-erasure. That silence became your cage, invisible but heavy. You could still see life happening around you, but you no longer felt a part of it. Asterisk, you stopped reacting. Not because you were calm, but because you were numb. Life became a routine. You showed up, you performed, but something inside felt switched off. Not angry, not broken, just disconnected. The truth is, no one silenced you. You silenced yourself. In the name of keeping things together. In the name of being easy to live with. In the name of peace. But peace without truth isn't peace. It's withdrawal. You started living in a space called "it's okay for now," and over time, that space swallowed everything else. Your wants, your voice, even your direction. It becomes harder to ask for something when you've spent years pretending you needed nothing. And eventually, you forget how to ask altogether. There is a sharp ache in being unseen. But there is also a dull pain in not seeing yourself. People didn't ignore you out of cruelty. They just assumed you were okay because you never said otherwise. You taught them with your silence. You told yourself, I don't want drama, but silence doesn't solve tension. It just buries it. Until one day, a small moment pulls the weight of years, and you snap in a way no one understands. Not even you. Marcus Aurelius said not to live as though you have unlimited time. Yet, for so long, you've lived like there will be a better time to speak. A better day to be honest. A moment where the words will come more easily, but someday is not a plan. And your voice will not return unless you go and find it. And you don't realize how this quiet delay is slowly chipping away at your soul. You live in the same home, you share the same space, but you feel distant, not just from them, but from yourself. Conversations become routine. They touch on tasks, on plans, on the surface, but underneath there's no connection. The cost of silence isn't fewer arguments. It's intimacy lost. It's presence fading. No one hears what you're holding in. Not because they don't care, but because they believe the version of you that you've presented. The version that doesn't get sad, that never disagrees, that never asks for space, that never says, I'm tired, that never says, I want to feel cared for too. You wait for them to notice, but they won't, not unless you open the door, and opening that door means speaking. It means choosing to share, not to create conflict, but to invite clarity. Epictetus reminded us that we cannot control others, but we can choose our response. That choice is not always silence. Sometimes it's choosing to speak, to set a boundary, to name what you need without apology. That is not weakness. It is strength directed inward. There is a quiet freedom in being fully yourself. Not the version you perform, but the one you protect. That freedom only comes when you stop confining yourself to the role of the one who holds it all together, the one who never stumbles. Every role has a limit, and if you don't choose when to shift, it will break under the weight. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't need to start a fight, but you do need to be heard. Say, I need you to really listen. Say, I feel like I'm being left behind. Say, I can't keep living only for others. Relearn how to be honest, not to blame, but to bridge the distance. Speaking is not about proving anything. It's about finding your way back to yourself. It's about not abandoning the one person you live with every day, yourself. And even if they aren't ready to hear you, at least you've said the words. At least you've stood on solid ground. even if your voice trembled. Marcus Aurelius once said that when a person is honest with themselves, they have nothing to fear. That kind of courage isn't loud, it's steady. It's the strength to speak your truth, even when the room stays quiet. Because no one else can hear you until you start hearing yourself. You stayed silent because you thought it would keep the peace. But perhaps that peace is the very thing that's leaving you hollow. Silence may feel like a compromise, but if the cost is losing who you are, it's a compromise too steep. You are not here to play the role of a man who only lives for the needs of others. You are here to live fully, to feel, to express, to matter. Speak, even if softly. Speak with whatever voice you have left. Say the things you've buried. Admit that you want to be seen. That you want your presence to mean more than routine. That you want your dreams, your thoughts, your feelings to take up space again. You don't need to shout. You just need to begin. Start in small ways. Write down what you've been afraid to say. Record your thoughts, not for anyone else, but to remind yourself that your voice still exists. Have one real conversation, even if it's just a few words. Let them be true. Let them be enough to whisper, "I'm still here." Because if you stay silent, it won't be an explosion. It will be a quiet vanishing, a slow fading of the parts that once made you feel alive. Like a fire that never got air, flickering until it's gone. And that is a cost no one should carry. If you felt yourself slipping away inside a relationship you still deeply care about, you're not alone. There are so many men who stepped into love with open hearts, ready to give, ready to protect, only to lose their voice in the quiet struggle to keep everything together. Let today be the start of finding that voice again. You haven't lost it. It's waiting. And the most painful part is, they rarely even notice it happening. They call it maturity. They name it responsibility. They say it's strength. But often, it's quiet surrender dressed up as reason. A man doesn't grow silent because he no longer cares. He grows silent because he no longer believes his feelings have a place. But you're still here. You're still paying attention. And that means there's still time. You don't need to change anyone else. You just need to turn inward, back to the part of you that's been waiting. The part you've left behind while trying to hold everything together. Begin with something simple. Write down one emotion you haven't said aloud. Ask yourself, am I still myself today? And if the answer feels distant, take one step toward changing that. You have the right to be heard, the right to feel deeply, the right to want connection without guilt. Marcus Aurelius said that your life is shaped by your thoughts. If you allow them to remain unspoken, you allow yourself to disappear quietly. But even a whisper, if honest, can start a new path. A single act of truth can reopen doors long closed. If something in these words spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Not to vent, but to remind each other we're not alone in this. And if you feel ready to keep walking this road back to yourself, stay. Each video will offer one small step toward returning to who you've always been.